Hello, welcome to another Cloud Security Alliance session. My name is David Sridla, Senior IT Auditor with Camgen Partners.
Hello everyone, I'm Deb Mukherjee, work in Royal Bank of Canada as an Associate Director, Cloud Governance.
Today, we will look at the business continuity management and operational resilience domain of the cloud control matrix, and we are ready to get started. The controls of the BCR domain focus on safeguarding critical business processes, infrastructure, and services, minimizing the impact of disruptions, and ensuring business continuity in the face of potentially disruptive events. Today, we will briefly discuss the context of the CCM and the shared responsibility aspects of the BCR domain, and then we'll dig a little bit deeper into some best practices for implementation of the controls. So let's briefly discuss what the cloud control matrix is. The CCM is an extensive framework of cybersecurity controls that have been developed by the Cloud Security Alliance through the collaborative efforts of cloud customers, cloud service providers, and experts in assurance, aligning with key global standards. The current version incorporates the shared security responsibility model, which assists cloud security providers and customers in delineating security responsibilities for cloud controls. The program is designed to encourage transparency among the CSCs and CSPs, and the foundation of this program is the Cloud Controls Matrix. The Cloud Controls Matrix brings a set of very valuable resources to the industry to help make sure that the best information security practices are applied to the cloud implementations. Beyond the core control specifications themselves, the CCM includes detailed implementation guidelines, the shared security responsibilities model, the consensus assessment initiative questionnaire, the auditing guidelines, mappings, and a number of other resources. Specifically, the CCM implementation guidelines are designed to help organizations implement the controls specified in the CCM and provide detailed instructions for the implementation of controls for both the cloud security customer and the cloud security provider, with the goals of helping to make sure that the CSP and CSC both apply the best information security practices effectively. The shared responsibilities model helps ensure that both parties understand their own responsibilities. It clarifies the allocation of responsibilities between the CSC and the CSP, and it aims to help organizations reduce risk due to omissions, misunderstandings, and miscommunications. The Consensus Assessment Questionnaire is a tool provided by the CSA that helps organizations assess the security posture of providers according to the CCM. Overall, the CCM consists of 17 different security domains with a total of 197 controls. This session focuses on the control specifications of the business continuity management and operational resilience domain. The BCR controls seek to protect against and minimize the impact of disruptions and overall help the CSPs and CSCs to ensure uninterrupted delivery of cloud-based services and to maintain operational resilience. There are 11 BCR controls, including policy and procedures, risk and impact analysis, business continuity strategy, business continuity planning, documentation, business continuity exercises, communication, backup, disaster recovery planning, response plan exercise, and equipment redundancy. The responsibilities for all the various controls specified within the CCM can be shared between the cloud customer and cloud provider, or they can be owned exclusively by one or the other. Typically, the CSP, the cloud security provider, is responsible for the security of the cloud, and the CSC, the customer, is responsible for its security in the cloud. We will discuss this allocation for the BCR control specifically over the next few minutes. The CCM and its associated implementation guidelines provide a map of control activities important for an organization's cloud security, and the SSRM guidelines provide guidance on which entities are generally responsible for performing those control activities. Said another way, the CCM provides a thorough framework of the controls to help organizations avoid the unintended or undesired control gaps. And while the CCM indicates those needed control activities, the SSRM describes the general allocation of those responsibilities. Among the 11 controls of the CCM BCR domain, there are 7 controls that are generally shared independent, meaning that the customer and the provider have separate independent responsibilities for operating the controls. There are 3 that are shared dependent, in which the parties rely to some extent on one another for the operation of the control. and there's one that is fully CSP owned. Keep in mind the shared security responsibilities model within the implementation guidelines provides just a rule of thumb indicating how the responsibilities are often shared between the service provider and service customer. The guidance is descriptive, not prescriptive. It helps in planning and establishing a reasonable baseline of expectations. The goal of working through the SSRM with your provider is to validate these expectations, making sure that all relevant responsibilities are defined, mutually agreed upon, and that there are no unintended omissions. An example of a control responsibility that could be clarified this way are backups. Backups are quite commonly a shared dependent responsibility, and this is especially true for a software as a service offering, with the security customer often relying on the SaaS provider for all of the backup services. However, while this is a common and reasonably expected approach, some large SaaS providers, in fact, do not provide full backup and restoration capabilities, services, or assurances for their customers' data and metadata. In such cases, the CSP's service offering may simply include full backup and restoration capabilities for its own equipment and services, and then provide the customer a basic API to allow the customer on its own to leverage third-party services for backups of the customer's data and metadata. While an approach is perfectly legitimate, without the customer and provider reviewing and expressly understanding and confirming responsibilities, the cloud customer may incorrectly assume that the provider's backup processes has the CSC's backups and restorations needs all covered, when in fact the CSC would be at significant risk if no other provisions are made. And the provider may incorrectly assume that the CSC knows that they are responsible for such additional control implementations. The CCM controls and implementation guidelines are very effectively used as a baseline to guide efforts and to ask the right questions to make sure that all relevant responsibilities are designated and mutually agreed upon between the CSC and the CSP so that there are no omissions or surprises. With this background on the shared responsibilities, Deb will now share some best practices in the implementation of controls from the BCR domain, and then we'll dive a little bit deeper into best practices on one of the shared dependent controls, specifically backups.
Thanks, David. So, in cloud computing, understanding the shared responsibility model is crucial. As the name implies, the shared responsibility model delineates who is responsible for what in regards to the cloud service. In this section, we'll cover risk and best practices and how the shared responsibility model is applied to business continuity and operational resilience in the cloud. In terms of risk, service outage is one of the top risks for business continuity and operational resilience, particularly for cloud service providers and cloud service consumers. To elaborate, here is the more detailed explanations of the causes, impacts, and best practices for mitigating service outages. Cause could be system failures, it could be hardware or software malfunctions that disrupt services, it could be cyber attacks, malicious activities like DDoS attacks that overwhelm and incapacitate services, or natural disaster events such as earthquakes, flood, or hurricane, or man-made physically damage the infrastructure. What could be the impact for this? It could be operational disruptions, interruptions in business operations leading to potential revenue loss, customer dissatisfactions, negative impact on user experience and trust, data integrity, potential loss or corruptions of critical data. The best practices for mitigating service outages are implement redundancy, use redundant systems and components to ensure continuous availability, employ load balancers to distribute traffic across multiple servers, or the other best mitigating option will be the disaster recovery planning. Develop comprehensive disaster recovery plans, regularly test and update DR plans to ensure effectiveness. Automated failover systems could be another mitigation factor. Deploy automated failover mechanisms to switch to backup system seamlessly. Use high availability architectures to minimize downtime. Robust cybersecurity measures implement strong security protocols, including firewalls and intrusion detection systems. They regularly backup and patch systems to protect against vulnerabilities. Other mitigating factor could be the geographic distribution. distribute data centers across multiple geographic locations to mitigate regional disasters, use content delivery networks, which is CDN, to enhance availability and performance. Continuous monitoring and alerting, use real time monitoring tools to detect and respond to issues promptly. The next risk factor could be the data loss and corruption, specifying the risk of data being lost or corrupted due to software bugs, hardware failures, or cyber attacks. This is another significant risk for business continuity and operational resilience. Cause could be the software bugs, errors, or flaws in the software code that can cause data to be improperly processed or stored. Hardware failures, malfunctions in physical components like hard drives, memory chips, or storage systems that can lead to data loss. Or cyber attacks, malicious activities such as ransomware, hacking, or data breaches that can corrupt, steal, or delete the data. The impacts could be the operational disruption, loss of critical data can halt business operations, financial loss, cost associated with data recovery, legal fees and potential fines, reputation damage, compliance issues, failure to comply with data protection regulations can result in legal penalties. Let's see what is the best practices for mitigating data loss corruptions. One could be the regular data backups, perform regular backups of all critical data, use automated backup solutions, and ensure backups are stored in secure offsite locations. Data encryption, encrypt data both in transit and at rest to protect against unauthorized access and tampering. Use strong encryption standards and regularly update encryption keys. Implement redundant storage could be the one of the best practices. Use redundant storage solutions such as RAID to ensure data availability even in case of hardware failures. Data integrity checks, implement data integrity checks and validation process to detect and correct data corruption early. And finally, the mitigation could be the disaster recovery planning. Develop and regularly update a disaster recovery plan that includes data recovery procedures. Test the DR plan periodically to ensure its effectiveness. And lastly, the risk could be the vendor lock-in, highlighting the risk that dependence on a single cloud provider can hinder business continuity if the provider fails. This is another critical risk for cloud service providers and cloud service consumers. Cause could be the proprietary technologies. Cloud providers often use proprietary technologies that are not compatible with other platforms, making it difficult to migrate services. Contractual obligations could be another cause. Long term contracts with cloud providers can lock businesses into specific services and pricing models. And other causes could be the data transfer cost. High costs associated with transferring data out of a cloud provider's infrastructure can act as a deterrent to switching providers. What could be the impact from this? Operational disruption, inability to quickly migrate to another provider in case of a failure, leading to downtime and potential data loss, or increased cost, higher cost due to lack of competitive pricing and potential penalties for contract terminations, or limited flexibility. The best practices for mitigating vendor lock-ins are multi-cloud strategy. Use services from multi-cloud providers to avoid dependency on a single provider. Implement cross-cloud management tools to streamline operations across different platforms. Adopt open standards, use open standards and technologies to ensure interoperability between different cloud providers. Data portability and regular audits. Conduct regular audits of cloud services to assess dependency levels and identify potential risk. Nonetheless, there are key best practices. So apart from that are the key best practices for CSP and CSC, as well as such as service level agreement. Negotiate SLA with cloud providers that include uptime guarantees, response times, and penalties for non-compliance. And the other options is the regular risk assessments. Conduct regular risk assessment to identify potential threats and vulnerabilities. Use risk management frameworks to assess and prioritize risk and implement mitigation strategies accordingly. Now, David will go over BCR 08 control with the different risk and best practices. Over to you, David.
Thank you. As Deb explained, the implementation guidelines elaborate on control best practices to mitigate a broad range of risks to continuity and resilience. At the specific control level, The implementation guidelines further elaborate on control activity best practices to mitigate risks related to each specific control topic to help organizations ensure that they have considered key issues. For example, within the BCR 08 domain, which is backups, there are some risks that organizations face due to potential for unknown or unexpected gaps within their backup processes. It's not uncommon for a cloud customer to find that the CSP provided backup service may not be sufficient to cover all of the CSC's needs, often due to the backup strategy not being comprehensive enough to cover all the risks the organization cares about. A cloud backup strategy that accounts for system failure or accidental data deletion, but not for adversarial scenarios such as recovery from ransomware, extortionware, or concealed advanced persistent threats, will generally not meet the full needs of a modern organization. Accounting for appropriate encryption, immutability, and retention of those backups, integrity monitoring, access control, controls like that, for example, within the backup strategy can make all the difference in a backup strategy being successful against such modern threats. So all the risks and controls shown here are just a small sample of those applicable to the backups processes for an organization. They are representative and they demonstrate the value that detailed implementation guidance can provide. With that, we will wrap up this session.
Thanks, David. So BCR in cloud computing is another area where shared responsibility is evident. The controls of the CCR BCM domain helps CSPs and CSCs to maintain resiliency and reliable cloud operations and enable organizations to continue their business even in the event of disruptions. We encourage you to download, review, and explore implement the CSA full cloud control metrics, including the core security and privacy controls, CCM implementation guidelines, and its integrated cloud's shared security responsibility model, which is SSRM, the consciousness assessment initiative questionnaire, which is CAIQ, the control CCM controls auditing guidelines, and related mappings and supporting information.
And whether you're a cloud customer, a cloud provider, or both, have protective conversations with your current or potential customers and providers on the delineation of responsibilities. Reach out to the CSA, join a CCM working group, and if you have any questions, reach out to the CSA at the addresses listed here on this page. We hope that this session has been informative and thought-provoking, and that it helps you as you begin to leverage all the components of the CCM framework to strengthen and mature your organizational cloud security.